At 4:38 a.m. on March 9, 2026, the Strait of Hormuz was carrying 21% of the world's daily oil supply through a navigable channel that, at its narrowest point, measures approximately 33 nautical miles across. Under normal conditions, that channel is divided into two 2-mile-wide traffic separation schemes, one inbound, one outbound, separated by a 2-mile median zone and flanked by territorial waters on both sides that belong, respectively, to Iran and Oman. Under the conditions that existed on the morning of March 9, 2026, the Strait of Hormuz was something different. It was a barrier. The Iranian government had announced the Cooperative Transit Protocol on March 1st, the requirement for all commercial vessels to register their passage with the IRGC Naval Coordination Center at Bandar Abbas and accept a boarding inspection before proceeding. In the 8 days since that announcement, the protocol had progressively hardened. What had begun as a bureaucratic delay, vessels waiting 2 to 4 hours for IRGC fast attack craft to conduct cursory inspections before being waved through, had evolved into something with the functional characteristics of a blockade, without the legal vulnerability of being formally declared as one. Vessels attempting to transit without registering were intercepted and turned back. Vessels that registered were inspected, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. 3 vessels had been detained at anchorage positions inside Iranian territorial waters, with no stated timeline for release. The masters of 2 additional vessels had reported that their IRGC inspection teams had remained aboard their ships, monitoring all communications for periods extending beyond 48 hours. The global energy market had registered its assessment of this situation with the precision that markets apply to existential uncertainty. Brent crude had closed above $147 per barrel on March 8th. Shipping insurance underwriters had suspended new coverage for Hormuz transit entirely. 14 LNG carriers that had been scheduled to transit southbound from Qatari loading terminals over the preceding 5 days had instead anchored in the outer approaches to the strait, their cargoes contracted and paid for, their destinations waiting, their masters unwilling to enter waters where the rules of transit were being written in real time by an adversary, with no obligation to make them predictable. USS Abraham Lincoln had been operating in the northern Arabian Sea since March 2nd, positioned there as part of the theater force posture, supporting Operation Epic Fury. Her strike group, 2 guided missile destroyers, a guided missile cruiser, a fast attack submarine, and a logistics support vessel, had been conducting continuous air operations against Iranian military targets since the campaign commenced. Her air wing had flown 847 sorties in 11 days. Her crew had been at sustained high operational tempo since before the campaign began. The carrier herself was carrying approximately 60% of her ordnance capacity following 11 days of continuous strike operations, a figure that her logistics officer was tracking with the specific attention of someone who understood that the number had a floor that, once reached, would end the carrier's operational effectiveness as a strike platform. The fleet oiler assigned to replenish USS Abraham Lincoln was USNS Laramie. She had departed the Jebel Ali logistics hub in the United Arab Emirates on March 7th with a full load of aviation fuel, ordnance, and provisions. Her transit to the carrier's operating area required her to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. She had entered the strait's southern approach corridor at 11:15 p.m. on March 8th and had been intercepted by an IRGC fast attack craft at 11:44 p.m. directed to heave to, and informed that she was required to register her transit and accept an inspection before proceeding. Her master had complied with the heave-to order under protest. He had then transmitted a flash precedence message to 5th Fleet Headquarters at NSA Bahrain and to USS Abraham Lincoln's command element. The message stated, with the specific economy of a mariner who had been at sea for 31 years and did not use unnecessary words, that USNS Laramie was stopped in the strait, that an IRGC fast attack craft was alongside, that the IRGC boarding team was preparing to come aboard, and that in his professional assessment, his vessel would not be permitted to transit without significant delay. At 4:38 a.m. on March 9th, USNS Laramie had been stopped for 4 hours and 54 minutes. The IRGC inspection team aboard her had spent 3 of those hours going through her cargo manifests with a level of detail that bore no relationship to any plausible safety or customs inspection rationale. They had photographed her communications equipment. They had spent 40 minutes in her radio room. They had asked her master, through an interpreter, for the scheduled rendezvous coordinates and timing of her planned resupply evolution with USS Abraham Lincoln. The master had declined to provide those details. The IRGC team leader had stated that the inspection could not be concluded until the information was provided. The master had transmitted this exchange to 5th Fleet within 10 minutes of it occurring. At 5:02 a.m. on March 9th, the commander of U.S. Naval Forces Central Command issued an execute order to USS Abraham Lincoln's strike group. The order was not what anyone in the international diplomatic community would have preferred. It was not what the United Kingdom, France, Germany, or Japan, all of whom had vessels either detained in the Strait or waiting in the outer approaches, had been formally consulted about. It was not what the UN Security Council had been given the opportunity to address, because the Security Council had been attempting to pass a resolution on the Strait situation for 6 days, and had been blocked at each attempt by a procedural hold that the deliberate pace of the process made impractical to overcome on any operationally relevant timeline. The execute order was issued because the alternative, allowing the IRGC to continue extracting operational intelligence from a U.S. Navy logistics vessel while simultaneously using that vessel's detention to degrade the combat effectiveness of the most powerful strike platform in the theater, had crossed a threshold that the operational commanders had assessed as no longer acceptable. USS Abraham Lincoln turned northwest at 5:07 a.m. Her 2 escorts, USS Lady Gulf and USS Nitsa, formed up on either beam. The strike group's fast attack submarine, operating independently in the Strait's deep water channel, had already been in motion for 11 minutes. The carrier's combat air patrol was augmented from 4 aircraft to 8 at 5:09 a.m., with the additional aircraft tasked specifically to establish air superiority over the Strait's transit corridor. At 5:15 a.m., the carrier's Strike Operations Center launched 2 EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft. Their mission was to suppress the IRGC's coastal radar and communications network along the Iranian side of the strait before the surface group entered the transit zone. The Growlers reached their initial operating positions at 5:31 a.m. and began their suppression runs. What they encountered was not the degraded Iranian air defense network that the preceding 11 days of Operation Epic Fury had produced across most of the country. The Strait's coastal defense infrastructure had been deliberately excluded from the Epic Fury target list, a decision made in the campaign's planning phase on the assessment that kinetic action against Strait-adjacent military installations would be interpreted as an attempt to seize or permanently control the waterway, a strategic communication that Washington had specifically sought to avoid. The IRGC had used that exclusion to maintain and, in some respects, reinforce the Strait's coastal defense posture. There were 5 operational radar sites along the Iranian shore between Bandar Abbas and Qeshm Island. There were mobile anti-ship missile batteries that had been repositioned onto Qeshm Island itself, placing their engagement envelopes directly over the inbound traffic lane. There were 2 additional Kilo-class submarines that the fast attack submarine had been tracking since 5 a.m., positioned at depths consistent with an ambush posture in the deep water channel east of Qeshm. The EA-18G suppression runs engaged 4 of the 5 radar sites with AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles beginning at 5:34 a.m. 3 of the 4 targeted sites were rendered inoperable in the first pass. The 4th site went offline briefly, then resumed emissions on a backup frequency, a contingency that the Growler crews had planned for and addressed with a second harm pass at 5:39 a.m. The fifth radar site, positioned on Qeshm Island's eastern headland, was covered by an Iranian air defense unit that engaged the Growlers with surface-to-air missiles on their second pass. The first SA engaged one Growler and missed by a margin that the pilot described in his debrief as uncomfortably narrow. The second SA was defeated by the Growler's onboard defensive systems. The Qeshm radar site remained partially operational. The surface group entered the Strait's southbound transit lane at 5:44 a.m. USS Leyte Gulf was in the lead, her SPY-1A radar sweeping the full breadth of the Strait and the Iranian coastline simultaneously. Behind her, USS Abraham Lincoln, a vessel whose flight deck alone covers more than 4 acres, moved at 22 knots through water that felt, on the tactical display, like it was getting smaller with every nautical mile. To the carrier's starboard, the Iranian coast was 11 nautical miles away. To her port, the Omani coast was 9 miles distant. The traffic separation scheme she was navigating had been designed for merchant vessels doing 12 knots. She was doing 22 and accelerating. USNS Laramie was 23 nautical miles ahead. The IRGC fast attack craft alongside her had not moved. The IRGC boarding team was still aboard. At 5:51 a.m., 2 IRGC fast attack craft sortied from Bandar Abbas at high speed on a course toward the transit lane. They were tracked immediately by USS Leyte Gulf and designated as contacts of interest. At 5:53 a.m., 4 additional fast attack craft were detected departing Qeshm Island's northwestern naval facility. 6 fast attack craft total, converging on the transit lane from 2 vectors, their speeds and headings placing them in intercept geometry with the surface group within approximately 14 minutes. At 5:54 a.m., USS Nitsa transmitted a warning on the Maritime safety frequency and on the IRGC Naval Coordination Channel at Bandar Abbas, identifying herself as a U.S. Navy warship conducting lawful transit through an international strait, notifying all IRGC naval vessels that any hostile action against U.S. or Allied vessels would be met with proportional force, and directing all IRGC fast attack craft to alter course and remain clear of the transit lane. The transmission was acknowledged on the Bandar Abbas Coordination Channel by a single word in Farsi that the duty interpreter translated, without embellishment, as noted. The 6 fast attack craft maintained their courses. At 5:58 a.m., the mobile anti-ship missile batteries on Qeshm Island activated their targeting radars. The activation was detected immediately by USS Leyte Gulf's electronic warfare suite and reported to the strike group commander aboard USS Abraham Lincoln. The targeting radar signatures were identified as consistent with the C-802 anti-ship missile system, the same weapon that had demonstrated its effectiveness and its limitations in multiple engagements over the preceding 11 days. There were assessed to be between 4 and 6 launchers active on the island, each capable of multiple rounds. Their targeting radars had lock-on geometry against every vessel in the transit lane. The strike group commander had 90 seconds between radar activation and the point at which the fast attack craft group would enter weapons employment range of USNS Laramie. He directed USS Leyte Gulf to engage the Qeshm Island radar emitters with harm, and directed USS Nitsa to position herself between the northeastern fast attack craft group and USNS Laramie. He directed the Combat Air Patrol to establish visual contact with all 6 fast attack craft and stand by for close air support authorization. And he directed the fast attack submarine, already positioned in the deep water channel, to issue a weapons employment warning to the Kilo-class submarines and stand by to engage if either Kilo transitioned to attack posture. USS Leyte Gulf fired 2 harms at the Qeshm Island emitters at 6 a.m. Both missiles reached their targets at 6:02 a.m. One battery was rendered inoperable. The second battery's radar went offline, but its fire control system switched to a passive optical tracking mode. a capability that the electronic warfare profile had not fully accounted for, because the optical tracker was a field modification, not a factory installation, and it had not appeared in any previous intelligence assessment of the Qeshm Island batteries. The second battery retained a degraded but functional engagement capability against the surface group. At 6:03 a.m., the second battery fired 2 C-802 missiles. Their targeting solution was optical rather than radar-guided, which introduced a tracking error that the fire control team aboard USS Leyte Gulf assessed in real time as they watched the inbound tracks deviate slightly from the ideal intercept geometry. The SM-2 engagement sequence was initiated at 6:03 a.m. and 18 seconds. Both C-802s were intercepted at 6:04 a.m. Clean kills. The debris patterns fell into the water between the transit lane and the island. The fast attack craft from Qeshm Island had closed to 8 nautical miles from USNS Laramie at 6:04 a.m. USS Nitze was positioned between them and the logistics vessel, her forward gun mount tracking the lead craft. The fast attack craft carried rocket artillery and heavy machine guns capable of causing serious damage to an unarmored logistics vessel at that range. They were not capable of seriously threatening a guided missile destroyer. That calculation, that the IRGC fast attack craft could hurt the vessel they were trying to reach, but could not get past the destroyer interposing herself, was the tactical reality that both sides understood simultaneously at approximately 6:04 a.m. and 30 seconds. The lead fast attack craft turned at 6:05 a.m. The turn was tight and fast, maximum rudder at maximum speed, a maneuver that threw spray across the craft's deck. The other 3 Qeshm craft followed within seconds. The Bandar Abbas group, assessing the situation from a range of 12 nautical miles and with full visibility of what had just happened to the Qeshm contingent, began reducing speed at 6:06 a.m. and altered course to the northeast at 6:08 a.m. They did not close further. USS Nitze reached USNS Laramie's position at 6:11 a.m. The IRGC boarding team aboard the logistics vessel was directed, via the Bandar Abbas coordination channel, to return to their fast attack craft immediately. The direction was transmitted simultaneously by USS Nitze's commanding officer and by a State Department duty officer on a secure circuit from Washington, who had been monitoring the engagement. The IRGC team leader aboard USNS Laramie transmitted a request for clarification to the Bandar Abbas Coordination Center. The response from Bandar Abbas took 6 minutes and directed the team to comply. The boarding team departed USNS Laramie at 6:19 a.m. The IRGC fast attack craft that had been alongside her for 5 hours and 41 minutes turned north and accelerated toward Bandar Abbas. USS Abraham Lincoln passed a beam of USNS Laramie at 6:23 a.m. The 2 vessels were close enough that crew members on the carrier's flight deck could see the logistics vessel's crew standing at the rail. The replenishment evolution that had been the logistical objective of USNS Laramie's transit was conducted in the northern Arabian Sea the following day, March 10th, under combat air patrol coverage, without interference. The carrier received 1.8 million gallons of aviation fuel and 340 tons of ordnance. Her strike operations tempo did not decrease. The Kilo-class submarines had not moved aggressively during the surface engagement. The fast attack submarine had maintained continuous tracking on both throughout the transit operation. Neither Kilo had transitioned to attack posture, a restraint that the post-operation intelligence assessment attributed to the acoustic detection of the fast attack submarine itself, a presence that the Kilo commanders had almost certainly identified before the surface operation commenced, and that had imposed a ceiling on their willingness to engage. 2 submarines that know they are being tracked do not make the same calculations as 2 submarines that believe themselves unobserved. The positioning of the fast attack submarine had not been incidental. It had been deliberate. Its effect was silence where a torpedo launch had been possible. The partial radar site on Qeshm Island that had survived the initial harm strike was fully rendered inoperable at 7:15 a.m. by a follow-on strike from the carrier's air wing using precision munitions. The strike was conducted under the standing authority already granted for kinetic action against active weapons systems demonstrating hostile intent. It generated no diplomatic protest that had not already been generated by the events of the preceding 2 hours. By 8 a.m. on March 9th, the southbound transit lane through the Strait of Hormuz was open. A Qatari LNG carrier that had been at anchorage in the outer approaches for 4 days entered the transit lane at 9:15 a.m. By the end of March 9th, 11 commercial vessels had transited in both directions without interference. The IRGC Cooperative Transit Protocol was not formally rescinded. It was simply not enforced. The fast attack craft at Bandar Abbas and Qeshm Island remained in port. The Coordination Center at Bandar Abbas continued to accept registration requests. No vessel that failed to register was intercepted. The numbers entered into the operational record at 5th Fleet Headquarters at 0900 on March 9, 2026. 8 days of progressive IRGC interference with Hormuz transit, resulting in 14 commercial vessels delayed or detained, and 3 vessels held at Iranian-controlled anchorages. 5 hours and 41 minutes, USNS Laramie, detained by an IRGC boarding team extracting operational intelligence. 4 radar sites rendered inoperable by EA-18G harm strikes. 2 C-802 anti-ship missiles launched from Qeshm Island. 2 intercepts. 0 damage to U.S. or Allied vessels. 6 IRGC fast attack craft committed to the interdiction operation. 0 IRGC fast attack craft that closed within weapons employment range of USS Abraham Lincoln's escorts. 2 Kilo-class submarines that did not fire, because 1 fast attack submarine was where it needed to be before the situation required it. 11 commercial vessels that transited the Strait on March 9th without incident, each carrying cargo that the world needed and that no adversary's coastal defense posture had been able to prevent from moving. The Strait of Hormuz is not a door that any single nation owns. History has tested that claim many times. It has never been successfully refuted, because every time an adversary has attempted to make it true, the cost of maintaining that position has exceeded any benefit the position could deliver. The math does not change. Only the people who must learn it again do. The strait was open. The watch would ensure it stayed that way.